There.
All right, I think we're live now.
That's good.
How's it going, Dad?
You look good in that shirt, man.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's sweater weather now. Getting cold outside.
Is it?
Yeah, here in Colorado. Yeah.
Yeah. So how cold?
It's been like chilly. It's not been like too bad, but like 60s, 50s. Or whatnot. It's been crazy though because of all the fires that are just on the other side. Like, so I live on the east side of a reservoir, and on the west side of it, there's been a bunch of fires, and so a lot of times, like you'll wake up in the morning and you can just smell it. It smells like a bonfire, but like obviously way more intense, and the whole entire sky will just be filled with smoke. I know that like a lot of people have been taking pictures in LA because there was some crazy fires going on there, but we've been having some too, so it's been nuts.
You ought to send me a picture. Yeah, I got one from LA and it looked like the eclipse.
Yeah, or like a Star Wars moon sort of scape or something like that. Yeah. It's eerie, especially like with COVID and everybody being indoors and stuff. I guess that's not really the case anymore. A lot of people are out, but it just, the whole 2020 is just it's a weird year. Presidential election coming up. Yeah.
Yep, definitely that. And, yeah, it has been a unique year and a lot of opportunity, I feel like, for growth, but, opportunity to, it's been challenging, obviously, for people, but, so I'm glad that nobody in our family has killed each other.
Yeah, I mean, it's been close. It's probably good that we're all living on other sides of the no, I'm just kidding.
The United States. Yeah. Well, if we wanted to, we could still get to each other.
Well, it might just end up being there. What are your? I know that like 2016 was obviously quite a contentious election, quite distinguished.
Yeah.
Do you need to wear glasses now?
No.
Oh, you look pretty good. You look
sophisticated.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's blue light. If you look at a camera.
Yeah.
I mean a computer.
Yeah.
And so I got 3 of them for $45, and
nice.
They really make a difference in the fatigue of your eyes.
You just want people to think you're smarter. I started talking election, and you got the glasses out.
That's yeah, because if they can see directly my eyes, they just see daffiness.
Yeah.
So you were saying?
So I mean, I've been I haven't had several elections that I've been really invested in. Like I've only been able to vote in, I guess, the last 3. Well, this would be my 4th or something. No, I guess this would be my just my 3rd election. And so, I mean, I remember some of the other elections growing up and stuff like that, but it felt to me like 2016 was particularly contentious. And, heading into 2020, especially because I think that with COVID, with everything that went on this summer with a lot of like Black Lives Matter protests and just everything that's been going on, I think that this is leading to a situation that it's hard for me not to feel like it's going to be just as contentious, if not more, than 2016. And so I'm, what do we do to make that not the case?
That's a great question. It seems like there's something that usually happens
Mm-hmm.
or somebody either crosses a line
Mm-hmm.
that everybody sees, this they remember who we are, and
Yeah.
say, that's not who we want to be. Like when the fire hoses came out on the blacks, in 2000 or 1967, 68.
Yeah.
And, they said that's not the way they want to be, and Goldwater was running for president, and I might get my names mixed up a little bit, but he said he wouldn't let a little black girl on the bus, and just seeing that scene,
Yeah.
the consciousness of the nation woke up. So, I think that there's a responsibility for what I call the quiet majority to be able to bring some reason and composure, because you got passionate people on both sides, but then you have people that are crossing the line.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that there's the ability in the midst of society to look at the advancement of mankind. By that, we were talking earlier, and I said the Civil War was a time that throughout all of history, well, I'm just saying there's a different perspective I have of 2020 in this way, that every 50 years it seems like there's been an offering for an advancement of mankind where there's a blindness. And it might be the generation that's coming up that opens that up for us. Might be the elderly, might be the politicians, it might be a combination, might be another nation.
Yeah.
But the Civil War just completely deconstructed slavery, and all the nations to say outlaw it. Now some still do it, but it was just everybody woke up and said, "Man, dominating another man like that or woman."
Yeah.
And then next, 1917, 50 years later, you had the War of Kings, and you had three kings that were cousins. And anytime they got into petty battle, millions of people die. And so that was done. And so you couldn't have despot kings just take over. And then 50 years later, which I was involved in, the civil rights, and it was really obvious, the mistreatment. It was horrific, can't sit on the same toilet, can't go to the same restaurant, can't, and so there was an awakening. What my hope and dream is that we can do it peaceably and all wake up and say, to an excitement, like I listed all the issues there on my phone, but, environmentally, I asked, is there an opening up to where I don't have to drive down the road or anybody and have a big diesel in front, or have other cars or my own that just is fumigating the atmosphere? It's got to go somewhere. And, there's a waking up in me, even like the treatment of animals in huge slaughterhouses.
Yeah.
And if you watch the process, it's just horrific. And find restaurants that make a hamburger that tastes just as good as vegan, And I do believe that there's awakening up, and there's voices, I believe, that are going to come up on both sides that say, can we listen to one another and maybe even hear and grow? And that's I think those voices have come up in the past, and they had councils over different issues where they sat really at the table, listen to one another. And this time seems to be a time where that seemed impossible. And I do think COVID's been part of the problem, because you can't get together and see each other as well. And, it feels like it could be a setup, where people can't get on the streets, or if they do, it's, not necessarily positive. So I do believe, I just submitted I have people that I relate to that are in the White House, and I just talked about focus groups, especially after this last debate. I said the compassion and the empathy and the understanding of race, of the race issues, of the police issues, of the economy issues. I made suggestions of groups that would be called in and listened to. And they're humbling. Now, that's on the White House side. I used to have relationships with the Democratic Party, and it just was the person that I related to them through was somebody I met in a church in Washington, D.C., and she ran all the White House events. And so I was able to talk to different leaders there. But now I think I do have an inroad, but and my role has been to kind of be a chaplain. They see me as somebody that they'll ask. When you're in that situation, people think they don't want to hear anybody. But I find that, no, you want to find wisdom. You want to find your Daniels.
Yeah.
And I don't care where you come from. So anyhow, my encouragement has been immediately have these focus groups, and I named some from the different communities to where we're assuming and making conclusions, and probably on both sides, where it's not coming with appreciation, like maybe you got something here. And, it's just so hard for me to hear and know that both are pushing untruths to make a point about each other, where it's the way to win a election, it seems, versus a way to build a nation.
Right.
So I think there's enough kickback from this first election or debate. I don't know if anybody liked it on either side. I think that Joe Biden was more presidential, more compassionate in his approach, and did his best to really hear the question and answer it. And I think that, that Trump hadn't done his homework enough to, I think I wasn't very pleased with, his presentation, and got you spirit with jabs. And then Biden came back and said, "You're just stupid," or "shut up." And then just, the Chris Wallace is laughing like, "What do I do with this?"
Yeah.
And you don't want the two leaders of the known world to.
Yeah, I mean, that's what is a little bit like perhaps more eerie than seeing the smoke, in coming back, from school. I'm like coming back from school and missing the first bit of the debate or whatever. And it's all like the weirdly looking apocalyptic outside. And then you just listen, and it was just extremely discouraging, because it felt like, well, and I want to be reasoned and balanced with, like, I definitely don't think that it's just a one side or another thing. But it did feel like a lot of what our president, like the plan was just to sow as much chaos and confusion into a conversation that needs to be had. Like, even if, like, regardless of who gets elected, these debates ought to be an important point of, like, our nation's at a crossroad, where we are interacting with, in a time that feels extremely volatile. And we have a lot of, people talking about violence. We have a lot of people talking about, just so much fear of the other side, and some of it's legitimate. I want to be reasoned and balanced.
Hey, sorry, I turned you on here because I'm looking to see if people are commenting. And I want to invite people to comment so that we can,
Yeah.
What I feel like in our conversation, Jed, is that there's a lot of love and a lot of respect. So hopefully, hopefully we can be a pattern for communication where, we get to, it's rare that somebody from the left and somebody from the right, and I would say there's more to our perspectives than that.
Yeah.
I look at it from the kingdom of God, and that's that's the greatest authority to me.
Yeah.
But I so I and I feel like I've dreamed for years that there would be a party called the Attunement Party.
Yeah.
Attuned to God, and the best values of God, I believe, have been missed. And then it attuned to people, and there's just something when you're able to crawl up inside of somebody else. That sounds weird, but you feel what they feel, or you see what they see, and
empathize. Yeah, empathy. Yeah.
Empathy.
Yeah.
But to take that time in this society to, I just kept having a picture last night after I went to bed of this elderly woman pushed up against a wall, shouting, "Help me, help me." And just the loneliness and the forgottenness. And, I just thought, man, a society that we're doing this with our two main leaders, and we're so out of touch with compassion. And, and I looked at me, and I just want to be known as a man of compassion. I want wisdom to win.
Yeah.
So I love it when you air, and I think you should, just what it is that you see and you feel that, earlier you brought up to me about his inability to say, and you hadn't seen it but you had heard about it because you were getting out of class, but Trump's inability to say, "No, I condemn this."
Yeah.
Now he came out and he did an interview on the White House lawn, and he condemned fully, the racists, and he said, I was trying to say stand down, which is a military term that means quit it, and I believe that he said, I don't even know who Proud Boys are. So I think then you do the research and see, has he been more exploitive about using those groups? And that's where sometimes even our sources of evidence will be, I want to read the police reports. I want to read, like on Breonna Taylor, I believe I read the police report, and I found other cases that I felt like were just outright, the law crossed the line, to say the least.
Yeah.
And so that is here nor there. And I'd love to go down and see if you and I were running for president, what would we have to say about these issues?
Yeah.
But I got to grab my phone real quick because I wrote down if I were president. But,
okay.
And I do believe this will get to the White House. I mean, I don't want to sound weird, but, if you wanted to, because they, I'm in conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, no, I think that's a good. Yeah, I mean, I think that we can talk about like the things, because you and I have talked about this before and after. Like, it's really hard for me because I have distinct moral convictions about this election, the way that we treat it, and I do have very significant problems with Trump and with a lot of the things that he has and represented. I mean, and I won't belabor the point on this.
No, I think you ought to state it. Let me grab my phone. Be right back.
Okay.
And you entertain everybody. You can sing.
Me entertain while you grab your phone? How long are you going to grab your phone?
No, just sucking. JJ took it. But do you got Amanda there? Because she can sing, man.
I don't have Amanda here, but she could. Yeah, she can sing.
Yeah, I'll be right.
I'm gonna run to the restroom too. People keep watching.
Yeah, tell us how to rearrange our living room or
give them a tour.
Yeah. So where did I put it? What I want to talk about? Okay. I'm gonna find it on here. I sent to somebody the issues that I was praying about. So it's right there. Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Did you send me notes? Couldn't get on. Okay, with your phone or more? Okay, good. Yeah, I'm ready.
Yeah, we gained audience while we were gone, so I think that's
good. Well, let's leave again.
Yeah. Okay. So you got your phone?
Michael Brown, there's more people watching you while you guys are gone the last 15 minutes. That's probably what what would be good is if Trump and
they just didn't. They just
laid down on pillows.
Yeah. There is sometimes where it's just like, well, you and I were talking about just on the phone how sometimes you wish that people could even just finish thoughts in the debate.
Yes, sir. I'm here.
Yeah, you're good.
JJ's interrupting again.
Yeah, you know that, JJ.
Yes. He's giggling. So Terry Johnson says we crack him up.
No, good.
Michael Brown says he's moving to Denver for 9 months. He'd like to hang out with me. He says he needs money.
Then I will not be a good help for that. Yeah. Apparently, the philosophy world isn't as lucrative as I thought it was. I mean, that's what I tell everybody. I got into environmental philosophy just for the money.
You gotta help me write this book, man. Danny Hahn, I got a book on Hope Reformation that he wrote. I think you'd really appreciate it. He writes, pithy, keen, succinct. So I'm gonna be letting that go. He just took messages from the past, but it was really good about hope in the land of the living because you got in the spiritual world. I'll just say this because people that are listening. I had a shepherd's rod word, that Bob Jones would give out every year, and after he died or before, he told me, "Hey, keep doing it if you feel like it." But it represents in Leviticus that every year we kind of get evaluated according to our faith and hope, and it's an invitation to greater faith and hope. And so, I felt like the Lord gave me a picture of the hyper spiritual, where everything's symbols and types, but it doesn't land on the earth, and then a hyper sovereignty that say God will do it,
Mm-hmm.
And then ones that are apocalyptic devastation. I mean that these people that they don't agree with are being used by the devil to bring judgment on the church, to clean it up, and to
right.
And that's our fate, is to be corrected by the Lord through traumatic events, society or, earthquakes and all that, where, it's just so much different than the nature of God because he doesn't destroy. His methods aren't destruction. It's to build up and to enhance and bring love, and he brings the kindness of God, leads people to a tenderness and repentance. But then there's the type that become very aggressive in politics, and they forget the Sermon on the Mount, where it's love your enemies. And, so I've had to find myself a few times, and that's what I want more than anything, is that I grow in love and faith and hope, because there's sometimes I've seen things that just challenge my hope. And then I've always find if I wait a little longer, this is what I've really respected about you is, wait a little longer. Wisdom rests in the heart.
Yeah.
And if I'm not in rest, if I'm aggravated, agitated,
yeah,
then I'm going to say something that's inflammatory unnecessarily.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's different than you. I want you to be passionate. I want you to say, here's what, but I really had a night where I just felt like we got a grand invitation in 2020 to become better as a whole society and the world. And we're fighting at the door, and we can't listen to one another to say, okay, maybe we're not doing it right with the environment, and maybe there's a better way. Maybe we're not doing it right with the poor and rich. But go ahead.
Well, and that's, so like the reason why I feel like I can have some of these conversations with you, and I don't want to like misrepresent a lot of people who are on the right or who are different than me, but or have different perspectives than me. But what it is like really scary about this, not just for me, obviously, but for a lot of people in my community and just in the, whether it be people on the left or people who just live in urban communities or people who are in the like environmental world or people who are in like the academic world, there's a sense in which like it really is a question of whether or not Trump and like Trump's organization has a whole lot of consideration for the things that we value, and even ourselves, and for people who are gay, or who are trans, or people who are like poor minorities, people who are in education, like the ways in which I've seen a lot of like rhetoric that's been pointed towards, academia, and not that there isn't good critiques of some of this stuff. But what just, it feels hard to like even have a concern. Like I was talking to you about this so my particular field is about environmental ethics, and about environmental policies, ways that we can, make this world better, more efficient, that we can like see the problems that are at hand, whether it's, large problems like global climate change, or whether it's smaller, like about ecological degradation, where it's like, well, it's not really about destroying the planet as a whole, but like, if we are fracking, or if there's these particular, or even just over farming or not burning the forest correctly, like this can damage ecosystems and it can harm plants and animals and the land, and also just even ourselves. And like, we got to steward the lands properly. And to feel so invested in that, and to feel like, man, this is something that we want to be able to do a lot of good. We want to bring, work towards making the United States, but also the world in general, just a better place and bring about a better state of affairs. And it's bleak to look at some of the responses that not just Trump, but some of the administration has in terms of, like there was the climatologist who was talking to Trump and was like, well, we've been seeing these temperatures steadily rise, and Trump was like, well, they'll come back down, and the climatologist was like, I wish the science agreed with you, and Trump said, well, the science gets it wrong, and I don't know, that's where it gets to the point where it's like, well, how do we have a good conversation? Like, if these critical values that we have are not being valued, I'm asking this in a part of like a sense of like, I want to understand, like, if Trump gets elected again, it's not like, it's like, well, let's just peace out for 4 years and not, advocate change or something like that. Like I want to be able to know how to advocate for working with the Trump administration, or just like people who support, farther right beliefs. But it just feels like, it feels like a lot of the values and the concerns that I and a lot of people similar to me share are just pretty categorically dismissed.
Yeah, and I'm looking for sources of information. By that, since I am talking to some people that are close to the situation.
Yeah.
I'm not claiming special privilege. I'm able to ask, more directly. And, I know that he is a businessman. I know a few that did business with him, and that it wasn't about environment, but he was kind of, I win, you lose. But then, for example, a man built windows for a building, and he said, you got to drop it $1 million or $2 million. And I said, no, I'll take all the windows and break them, and he said, okay, you win, shook his hand. And so that approach would not necessarily be mine. But I think that he had an event or two that led him to be more environmental friendly. Now, as I said, is he tremendously knowledgeable? So he's put 74 new regulations in place that are good. But they say that he's put probably 100 that are negative in their perspective. But and this is just evaluating from this person is a Democrat, and that's where I want to go. Sometimes I want to go and see, but when you look at them, I don't know enough about the environment's effects. That I think that it isn't. I don't pick up like people who dismissed it completely and just said this is just bizarre ideas from Al Gore that have nothing to do with nothing. I do feel like there's an appreciation for the warming of the planet and for the effects of it. And, it's so, so I think that's where sometimes the rhetoric is so strong.
Yeah.
It was like when I was in the newspaper at 17 years old and on the front page, and it blew my mind that they could actually lie and say the opposite thing that I said. Yeah. And so that's where I'm praying for, just where can we get wisdom, that on certain issues. Now, certain things are real obvious, obviously, but I would say that's as far as I know. I've just been looking at the regulations and saying, okay, now there's been a real attempt, and there's been a few that have been in his ear from the Republican Party that it affects their home states, so they're pushing, and Tesla has had a voice to him, and so sometimes, like I would think, okay, this president got in, he's gonna just run amok, and I find that what I feel like is God tempers it and brings people around. But you've got a right to be concerned, so the greenhouse gases has been something that he's been concerned with. They talk about the Paris Accord, that he didn't respond well to that, the Paris Agreement, but there was other issues that were tied in. Sometimes it's complicated where these laws get you committed to financial commitments and other things that America has been looked to foot the bill on some things. So,
well, yeah, I mean, I don't, like I think that the environmental response to like environmental, whether it's like, again, whether it's climate change or ecological degradation, just in general, yeah, it's obviously an extremely complex situation. And that's a lot of what the field is about like, okay, well, we want to make our world a better place, quite literally, and we want to maintain that, a healthy balance of our ecosystems and whatnot. And so there's like important conversations that need to be had. I think that it's, like you also have to have conversations of what's right for the economy, that's what's like a little bit discouraging and kind of a little bit terrifying is like, I feel like, 4 years ago now, a lot of what Trump's platform is about like getting rid of decorum in presidential debates and speaking his mind. And a lot of people liked him because he just like went, wasn't PC or whatever. And I think that seems like a problem to me. Is like, I think that there's reasons why it's good to be PC. Like, I think that being politically correct, I get like not being disingenuous, but like, like it's important to have the leader of our nation be really smart with the language that he uses. And so like, I think a lot of people on the right are like, well, the media really portrays Trump in this certain way. And I think that's really fair. Like, I think that, what passes on sound bites and this is true of any politician, but particularly with Trump, I think too, is like, there's a lot of sound bites, but and what is more terrifying is what's going to be shared more, or what's more, embarrassing, or what catches people's attention, not necessarily what ought to be shown, but what people just like want to consume is what is shared. So I totally get that. But I think at the same time, I'm watching this election and I'm like, I'm watching the debate and I was like, no one's framing this for me. It's not like the media cutting it up. It's just like, it's verbal kind of garbage. And there's a lot of like back and forth. And again, that's not really just Trump's fault. But it seems like a new precedent that's been set in politics where there isn't decorum and there isn't an appreciation. And I know a lot of people on the right would accuse the left of doing the same thing, but it seems like, I don't know. It just seems like a lot of what Trump encapsulates or like personifies is a lot of this chaotic energy that's really scary.
Yeah. Well, I think, I just kind of have a perspective that, that he got, I think the real atmospheric condition was resignation by him, in this sense that when you've been attacked as much as he has, and, I've just been counting up the ratio in newspaper headlines of what's positive for him and what isn't. And that he's a human being and that he just resigned himself to say, the people that like me are going to like me and vote for me. The people that aren't.
Yeah.
And, standing against some pretty dark stuff, in his mind. And I wouldn't say that's untrue. I just say that no matter how anybody responds, and I feel like I failed when I got kind of attacked and stuff, I just was resigned to not care, and I just put out tweets and stuff that made Trump's look nice, probably. And it had to, I just think that's why I say that we pray for our presidents or leaders. Is I did for Obama, just it's the hardest job, President Obama.
Sure.
I wanted to see him succeed for the sake of the nation, but for also their own soul, they're a human being. So I believe that, he kind of came out with this resignation that, they're not going to like me anyhow, and I'm not going to allow him to lie about me, and 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 I'm gonna name call, and I'm gonna, and that's like you said, the decorum, the missing of honor, just throughout our nation, and the way social media goes, and appreciation. You got to thank somebody like Joe Biden or President Trump if they got to that place, Vice President Biden, that if they got to that place, they had to go through a lot, and so they're worthy to give the benefit of the doubt in the beginning. I think the first election, like you said, he surprised people with this candor, and it was inflammatory, but it's not going to work this time. Either you're going to have real ways to constructively build this nation and address some of these issues with compassion, and say, I'm looking at race, and I'm saying that I feel like I've done so much for the blacks, but they're not going to see it. They're not going to value it. But I'll keep doing it. But I don't think it speaks to more the heart of what they're experiencing. And he's a very economically based person.
Yeah.
And so he sees, and I know of the programs, because I get to sit by, this person was, a black woman, very sharp. She was the national education director. And she was responding to, a real civil meeting she had with him and his desire to help, the schools, inner city schools. She was from Detroit. And so it definitely isn't what you see. What you see is the Philippians 1:28. It talks about quit getting in battles with one another. It says it means destruction for both of you.
Yeah.
And
yeah. Well, and that's what I do think. I think the wise takeaway from is I think that there's a lot of chaos, and even the question about him explicitly denouncing the white nationalists, and then the chaos that ensued from what interpretation of whether or not he denounced them or didn't denounce them. And I think, it was people on the left were looking at it and it was like, man, this is just such a softball. Like, why can't you just in the moment immediately state, yeah, no, this is terrible. But I think people on the right were like, well, the question was phrased weird, and that he clearly is against it in general. I think a lot of this discussion is a little bit of chaos that's distracting from the essence of it. But what still is at the essence is well, I want to see the United States be in a place where we are treating minorities and people of color and just people who have been disadvantaged. So whether that's poor, whether that's just alienated for whatever reason, I think that throughout the history of the United States, and so a lot of people will talk about how you go off to college and you become a liberal, and colleges are liberal making machines. And I think there's some good critiques there, but I think a lot of it too is just in college, you kind of learn the history of the United States and how, you were talking about a situation, but whether it's just the Jim Crow era in general in 1960s, and the Freedom Riders, and what happened to when the KKK flipped the Freedom Riders bus and lit it on fire, about the stand-ins, when kids would go to diners or sit-ins and like just sit, like people of color would just go and sit at diners that were white only, and people would spit on them and throw stuff at them, and then they would get arrested. And there was like, just, I mean, there's a lot of eerie, well, eerie isn't even the right word. There's a lot of just real evil that was in the history of the United States. And like, whether it's from slavery, whether it's from Jim Crow era, whether it's redlining, whether it's, you know, modern day, whether it, with like prison systems and a lot of that. And so I think that, you know, this question of like whether or not Trump's denouncing the Proud Boys or the, you know, nationalists or something like that. I do think we should get away from that conversation of like, you're racist. No, he's not racist. Or I think we need to get back to a conversation of like, look, this has been a huge problem in the United States history, like the way that we've treated minorities and the way that we've treated the disenfranchised and the way that we've exploited the disenfranchised and the poor has to be addressed. And so, yeah, like let's not get as distracted in these conversations about like who said what, and more get to like, okay, well, what's going to happen? What good is going to be done for the sake of, you know, making the United States a better place and righting a lot of these wrongs. And so I think one of the big things that I always have a problem with talking to people who are more conservative is it sometimes feels like people don't appreciate just how like problematic a lot of the American history has been, and like just how much we have treated the other, you know, whatever that be, just the disenfranchised, how we've exploited them, and like that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, and I believe two things. One, I believe there's a time where people's eyes are open, and there's a way to open their eyes. And if they're blind, and I would say I was blind, you know, when my dad was saying, "Hey, we're going to have fair housing," and I lived there. He had to explain, because, you know, I just had the sense of two different cultures. They want to be separate. I didn't have big developed opinions as a 12-year-old.
Right.
But when my neighbors were very upset with it, then, you know.
Of desegregation?
Yeah. Then I had to ask, you know, bigger questions. But if you back up, I feel like the issue that happens for any nation is, you know, like if you ask the world's population, they'll say it's just categorically, number one, the United States value their individual civil rights more than any other nation. And, you know, I've stayed in other nations. And so when that's not appreciated, I believe there's a way to give appreciation for the advances, because a lot of people died and a lot of suffering. And I did a lot of things to ensure, you know, that second there's advances in technology and science and in workers' rights. I knew how hard it was to make a living, and I didn't want that to be for the next generation. And I think that, you know, there's all around the world, you know, immigrants.
Yeah.
And they experience a much better life when they come here. So
sure. Yeah.
When you see that, and you see counter or crush culture or whatever it is, you know, then you feel like you're not historically seeing the world, and that to have a complex people group with a lot of different desires and not to have anarchy as success. By that, I'm not saying you can't have more success than that, but the Constitution is one of the greatest gifts ever given to man, I believe. And, you know,
I mean, it's not like we were. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. Yeah. No, I agree. I think that, but I mean, like,
there has been a lot of courage shown throughout our nation and throughout the leadership when
Yeah.
there really was some amazing stances taken. So I'm not
Yeah,
saying
yeah, yeah. And I don't like the democracy and the beauty of like, I mean, really what the United States was from, whether it's from like a monarchy to a democracy, or like even from mercantilism to capitalism. Like I think that there's been a lot of fantastic, advances, and like I think social standards have raised a lot, but there is, like you talk about like the Constitution, and then the fact that like it wasn't until like the 1920s until people could actually vote, like it wasn't. And so I think that's and maybe that's where it always feels like conservatives and people on the left or liberals can be talking past each other, because on one hand you're like, well, I want you to appreciate what the United States is and what the United States does. And I think that it's like, well, obviously, yeah, like I think that there's a lot of great a lot of beautiful things like civil liberties and like giving people freedom of like and to have opportunity. But the fact of the matter is that like for a lot of people, that opportunity hasn't been available. And like even now, I think that the way in which opportunity is not given to everyone, or not given in the same degrees and amounts. We talk about like social mobility. Like that's a great indicator of like, how long does it take for a family in poverty to generationally like get out of poverty. And there's some countries where if you're born poor, there's much more economic opportunity to elevate. And then there's some countries where it's more difficult. And the United States isn't horrible, but isn't great in that. Like, it's like, I think 30th or something in a lot of rankings. And you have like places like, Germany and Norway and Denmark and the UK and a lot of places that it's quite clearly better, but then there's places where it's quite clearly worse. China, it's worse than in the United States and stuff. And so I think that we need to get away from this conversation of national pride in such that it's like, well, we can do no wrong, or that we are this beautiful, any critique of the United States is like anti-patriotic. But I think that we need to like take pride in what we can be, is basically what I think. That like look and say, okay, well the future of like a lot of what the United States was about is about giving opportunity and about freedoms and about personal rights. And it's like, well, let's continue that project then. And like, let's look forward and making sure that like, it certainly wasn't the case that when the United States was founded, we did in any way adequate job of getting there. But like slowly there's been progression and whatnot. And that's why it gets a little bit scary, because it's like, well, are we going to keep going for social progress? Are we going to keep trying to make it so that like individual liberties are like protected, and that people can, have good labor and not be wage slaves? And I think that's what a lot of what the left is like concerned with. And then it maybe just gets lost in translation a lot of times, where, because I think that's something that we can definitely agree on,
Yeah, and I think that, I guess, and this is just, I think style or maybe a wisdom issue, is that when, like with my parents, they did the best they could with the grace they had. And
Sure.
My dad advanced the agenda for, he was an inner city principal for Blacks in a major way. And he had a mixed history with, people that wanted to kind of milk the system, and then ones that needed the empowerment and were launched. And so, and my mom, ran, the levy for the schools so that they could get more money so they could do a better job. And so I think that seeing and waking up sometimes and seeing when it looks like people around you are blind, it doesn't sometimes feel very appreciative, feel like somebody's asking a question and say, and I love the way you asked me a question. You said, "Dad, now, don't you see that? Or is that a problem with you?" And I can't remember the issue. And I felt honored in the approach, because it gave me a chance to reflect my heart. And I think that this discussion could lead to many that could be the kind of discussions where you can say, okay, we've done good. Some issues we've done really bad, and how can we come together and increase, just listening to you. And sometimes you'll have real ideas that I never thought of how to bring forth a efficient city.
Yeah.
And an alive city.
Yeah.
I've owned many, many houses and duplexes, etc., buildings, corporate buildings. And if I would have had some of those ideas, I wouldn't have been so wasteful, or wouldn't have been about making it work so that I'm pouring out my place, my factory places, which I didn't have as much, but I did. My air conditioners weren't that good. They could have been leaking freon, and now I'm more sensitive to that. And I know.
And a lot of that is we've gained a lot of knowledge in the last 20 years or 10, years of, a lot of I know this isn't just about environmental discussions, but here's an interesting tidbit about environmental philosophy and what should we do. Well, not we, because I wasn't in there, but the environmental community, especially environmental philosophy, used to talk about conservation a whole lot, environmental conservation of conserving ecosystems and protecting the stability of ecosystems. And so it was just well, we got to keep these ecosystems stable. And just in the last 20 years, there's been a lot of advancements in the study of ecosystems. And it's well, ecosystems fundamentally are a dynamic process. They're not static. And so it's not really about conservation. It's about in certain points, it still is about conservation, but it's more about being able to appropriately adapt and not disrupt systems and patterns of flow. And so anyway, there's a lot of information that is being learned and being discovered, and how as we look at it. And I think that's what's kind of exciting about all of this is we can look at our cities and we can be well, we're learning better ways to build them, and we're learning about what causes what is inefficient and what causes a lot of heat, rises, and how do we home people efficiently and aesthetically and have it so that people can walk around cities and not be lost in these concrete jungles and sort of thing. And so there's so much good conversation to be had. I think what's really important is finding enough core values where we feel like we're talking with someone and we trust them enough on those core values that we can even have the conversation.
But I concur with that entirely. I think, just speaking of the environment, that, where Trump is, for clean air, clean water, he's for where he's been weak, because he has been committed to conserve and affordable hydropower and some other things.
Yeah.
Methane gases,
Yeah.
fracking, that's a weakness. Those are weaknesses. But
yeah.
I think so. It's been he's been progressive for some, but traditional. It was like talking to Mike Bickle when he was leading. If he didn't see it, he didn't see it. You know,
right? I think that, so. Like, I think with, I mean, certainly the drawing from the Paris climate. I mean, there's a lot of like, and how much even that rhetoric, if it's more like what needs to be done versus like if you're doing nothing about these things, that in of itself is like a huge problem. It's about restrictions on companies and corporations, types of whether it's about air conditioning systems or whether it's about transportation or whatnot. You know, there's just a whole lot of areas that he could be doing a whole lot better about it. But what's actually like really scary is too just a lot about the rhetoric of like how much is like, you know, when he dismisses and is like, oh, well, you know, the earth will cool down. And it's like, well, no, that's not how it works. Like, we actually do have to address this problem. And for people who are scientists and who are working on it, you know, like we look around and you're like, okay, well, that's not the case. And so I think that like a value for science is something. What do you think about that? Like, I know that, you know, this is definitely something to critique on the left, but maybe this is a little misguided, but it certainly feels like there's an anti-science, there's an anti-academia, there's an facts sort of agenda on the right. And I'll back off. Like, I don't want to assert that more than I should, but it certainly seems to be that way.
Well, I think there was something that you said earlier. You know, we're talking a lot about Trump, and I've done, you know, a lot of research about the 47 years of Biden. And the one thing that I feel about Trump is that he'll say no, 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 and then he'll speak with his feet. He'll say yes. He'll go, like he went to an environmental company in Florida, and they gave him a real thorough education about conservation, but about celebrating the natural resources of or environment protection. Yeah. And, you know, I saw that and I watched some of those things and I thought, he's a learner, you know, and he wants to learn. But at the same time, I would say, I don't feel that as much on the right, like with the environment, because, you know, a lot of the people I'm around, and they love the environment. I mean, they love the environment, and they're pro-green, they're pro, you know, there's some people that, and it's becoming more the majority that are progressive in that area. I think that there'll be more funding that way, and I think there'll be more, you know, work that way. I think when it gets out there for some, like fracking hasn't been proved, but it just makes common sense. If you're going to rush that much water through the earth, there's going to be a destabilizing effect at some point. And so sometimes you just have to have common sense and be proactive, and don't do it until you know for sure it's not going to cause problems. And people say, well, we'll lose jobs, but we always lose different kinds of jobs. And I've been in that group that's lost a job because it advanced. Yeah. Well, I get another job. I mean, that might be better. Yeah. But I think, you know, if you go on with the economics, you know, I think there's no comparison being a businessman and knowing what provokes involvement from a society. And one of the most sacred things is what people do with the major portion of their life. a career in building resources and feeling that mobility of providing for those around you. And, to come to the United States, and there was land opportunities, there was mineral opportunities, there was, it was just, you just don't go to a nation. William Penn was an amazing man too. He, they wouldn't in Jamestown, they just take Anglicans, and then everybody else they wouldn't. Well, he said, everybody as a Quaker, he said, everybody comes here free and peaceful, and they were profound in their ingenuity and the land. And they just go into a room, sit in a circle, and be quiet. And then when a thought hit somebody, and it would be a lot of times real practical, how we're going to run this, our community. So I think that,
well, I don't want to, just to clarify, like, I think that, I don't want you to feel, and obviously, I mean, a lot of what the concerns that I'm getting at are directed towards Trump. And I think that, I think probably we can get away from talking about just Trump over Biden, because I don't want to get in a place where I'm like defending Biden per se, or trying to like,
I want to learn. I mean, I have not heard enough from him at this present state. I mean, it did bother me with Kamala Harris. How you say it?
I think it's Kamala.
Just where, and I saw a few things where, she had put Biden down for sexual advancements and made him sound like a pervert. And then they asked her about it. Well, now your buddy, right? She said that was a debate, like it's a show. And I'm thinking, it's not a show. It's so. Yeah, well, the concern is really to know, where does this man stand, and when he talks about raising taxes, or he says, I'm going to do the Green Deal, and then he says, no, I'm not, I'm going to do the Biden deal, but you're still talking about trillions of dollars potentially.
Right.
And it's a fact in society. It's a fact that with us as a family, you got a limited pie, and you got to distribute it with equity. And everybody, I can remember just having a budget, and this person fights for their part, and it's just I think on the Republican side, I can track the money better, and I can see the use of it better. I think on the Democratic side, I want to see the social programs they're talking about, but I know that my insurance is much more expensive under this plan. And I'm fighting a lot more. My claims, which don't go through, and they should. And I'm not saying that's the Obama plan. I'm just confused about it,
Yeah, well, I think that conversations about economics are extremely important, and also not my forte. I'm not saying that I'm not sort of empathetic or like, but my field of study is definitely not in economics. But I do think that there should always be a prioritization of where we look at economics as first and foremost, like what takes precedent is the economic opportunity for, I think, the lowest and disadvantaged. Like, I think so. That's why questions about like unemployment and questions about the poverty line and questions about minimum wage and stuff like that, and are, to me, the economic questions that I find most important, because I think that you have to look at what is it doing. Like, and an economy is only ought to be judged by how it benefits the lowest in the group. Because if you have an economy set up where we're like, just theoretically, like, let's imagine a scenario in which like we're creating a lot of money and wealth, but it's only, a certain group of people who are taking, the majority of it, then it doesn't really matter that you created a lot of that wealth because it wasn't actually distributed to those who actually need it. And so I think that, we got to talk about labor, and we got to talk about meaningful work, and like whether or not people can like engage, and like, I mean, it seems so American to talk about like buying a home. And I think that there's economic questions of like, can people who are on minimum wage even sort of think about buying a home? Like, not if you're in an urban community, like it's done, and like you can legitimately be like, even if you have double minimum wage, you could be making, twice the amount. And you still wouldn't like have really the assets to buy a home and maintain a home. And so I think that, with economics, I'm less concerned about measures of GDP or like those are instrumental concerns. Like GDP going up is great insofar as that it benefits the people who are within that community. And, like the more assets that we have are great insofar as it benefits the lowest amongst us. And, so I'll always be coming from that frame of reference.
And I mean, ideally, we throw away enough food, other things to feed our society.
Yeah.
It is a blight on our nation. And, being a small business owner and cleaning, the market set the value. And so if I charge somebody more than $14 an hour for our cleaning, then there was somebody that would charge them 12, and they might have, honestly, workers that were from another country that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a huge problem too. Yeah. Like in the labor sector, we have a lot of people who are getting paid under the table. And I mean, we both people on the left and right think that that's a problem. It's depending on who do you point at as the source of that problem, or just how do we rectify that problem, I think and I think that's a good question to ask. Like, how do we?
And I think we're going to have, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but some courageous, benevolent business people that they get in it to do right, and whatever that costs them, like my older brother, or I committed to pay a good wage and piecework. And I ended up in a business that you're supposed to make 12 to 14% with a lot of work. I had 120 at the top. I made 35, 40%.
Yeah.
We got very efficient, very effective, and everybody was getting paid good. Now, I think that there's creative solutions. People will look at their margins and they'll say, if it gets bumped $2 an hour at a restaurant or something, or a grocery store who works on a 7% margin, I've lost my margin. I'm out of business. Versus, maybe I have to pass that on to the consumer, but there's other ways. I just think that God endorses if you do the right thing. If you got people working 8 to 10 hours and they're still starving and they can't live at home, you can't be happy with that. What I felt like God helped me with was I bought all those duplexes in an auction where I wasn't able to just give them salary because there was only a limited amount there.
Yeah, you could
put a down payment on the duplexes. And the duplexes, because of the RTC, when the savings loans went under, were $23,000 a piece. So their payment's $200 a month for a 3-bedroom, nice duplex.
Yeah.
And then
I think there's many different ways that you can get at it. Where you look at people who are, just laborers and be like, okay, well, if we can't increase, wages in this sense, then maybe we can control rent, or even instead of rent, we can get, a lot of programs. And I actually think that Trump has advocated, like, I think that there's a lot of things where like there will be agreement between Republicans and Democrats on things, but of course we never talk about those things because it's not as fun and exciting. And I totally agree with, but like I think that there's been some like to provisions in which the state helps, people who are buying their first houses or people who have low income buying homes. Like I think that that's something where we've seen agreement with Republicans and Democrats in the past, and I think that can be good. And so there can be overlap there, but what I do think is like when we talk about things like healthcare and we talk about things like living wages and stuff like that, I do think that it is important. A lot of times people will be like, well, how are you going to pay for it? And it's like, well, this is what the government pays for. Like, this is the role of the government, is to, like, as a society, this is our top priority, is to keep our citizens safe and healthy, and like a roof over their head, food on their table, and their health maintained as best as the government can. And I think that, we look around and it's like, what's good about being the wealthiest nation in the world if we can't meet these standards of where like people just have healthcare, where like you don't have to be terrified. I mean, and I've been there. Like, I have incredible safety nets, but there's been times where I literally am like, I don't want to go to the hospital because like in Hawaii, I got hit in the head with that bed frame and I had like stitches, and it was like, well, I just don't want to go. Can like someone sew it up or something? Because and like that's a minor thing for me, but like
pretty good. I mean, it could have gotten affected. No, it's a real deal.
Yeah. And so people are like, well, I want to make sure that I get insulin, and that I don't have to like have my entire life be about working 80 hours just so I can afford, my insulin or my, or medication of any sort, and so that's where I think that, we just have to be able to have those conversations. And that is what is scary about that last debate, but maybe it will, maybe things will change.
I think you're making an excellent point. The role of government, adding the health and, is important. I think food, I do hope that there's, what I see is, I think we're going to have to roll up our sleeves. By that, I feel like, white business owners, to be like Job, where he mentored young men. And I know that I bring in women. I mentor like black young men. I'd bring them in, and young women. Huh?
And I said, and young women, mentor black young men and women, and not just black, but like.
Yeah, and there was different ones, Asians that had, there were a lot of Asians just because they were hard to understand. And so I think we're going to have to roll up our sleeves. And I think if Trump did that, but it's like John Kennedy said, John F. Kennedy, it's not what your nation can do for you, but what you can do for your nation.
Yeah.
And I think if you have people that haven't sewed into the nation a great deal, and then they're saying, I want these rights, I think, well, we all got to, like on the kibbutz, everybody worked and participated. And I think you'd agree with that. But I this part, let me just say this, that I think that there's a lot of older people that have a lot of wisdom, and it used to be SCORE executives, senior executives, I can't remember. And they come and they help you with your accounting. They help you with, investments. And I think we got to do that. I think we got to have that for mentorship for people on how to rise in society and make way for them, and how to for them to get honor, to bring them to different groups. Where that's one thing my dad did was, I want you to bring this young man to an inner city man to a, I can remember one time it was like the Philharmonic crowd, the opera, and it was Robert. And he had Robert play the piano, and there was all this judgment because he had his tattered clothes, and he just killed it on the piano. And then he talked to him, and it just was a night of transformation. Mm-hmm. Because they'd never been close to a Black person. And so I do believe that we could have these dinners for six where you got to get with six different people, and we help mandate it, voluntary, mandatory, and you listen to him. You ask 3 or 4 questions, because when I hear the plight, like I was in that hotel lobby and the Muslim man that was there, and he just, I at first was coming from the view of Christ, and he had been a little abrupt with me because I wanted to go over in the corner and pray. Of course, I wanted to pray out loud and disturb him. But when he sat down, and he had lost a baby, but he just told about his life getting here. And I just, I fell in love with him. And I think there'd be so much more of that if we had, where we really have to roll up our sleeves, and we have to go meet each other, and we have to take our extra coats and take them to people that need them. I probably got 8 coats in there, so I hear you. And it's not the nature of Christ and the kindness to just say, poor the poor by their own making, and, I've taken down, there's a couple of people you and I know that, just very, very far right, and, very, one strict constitutionalist, but way more than that. And I took him to the inner city with David Allshaw.
Yeah.
And, he just watched how I had the food kitchen, and he was changed. I took Ron Freeman. I took Newt Gingrich down there.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And weekly for a Bible study on the Sermon on the Mount. And if you don't walk away.
Right.
So I do think that there are some creative ways, just, I would love it to be voluntary, mandatory, that we go listen to the environment, about the environment. And we, from a place of invitation, I think we got to show the benefits and the outcomes.
Yeah.
Maybe more intrinsic, but that's what we need built up more than anything,
No, I'm all about that. I'm with you. I think that being able to listen to what people, and I think that, so I was seeing some of the comments here too. And I think, I think there's a lot of people who probably lean more, it's towards the right, and have a lot of the hesitancy towards whether it's Obamacare, about insurance premiums going up, or even you were talking about how at the end of the day, you're well, am I gonna have to pay more for insurance premiums if we're going on this, stuff like that. And so I think what's important too is to be okay, well, let's have that conversation. I think that it's a legitimate concern. I think it's a really legitimate concern for people to say, well, hey, I'm a middle-class family, and we're doing fine or whatever, but if we have to pay insurance premiums that are now cutting in as much as our mortgage or something like that, I can't do that. And I think that's a totally legitimate conversation to have. And I think that that's what's hard, is that immediately it feels like you have to be well, I'm this side or that. No, it's well, no, what we need to do is get it so that most people, everybody can afford healthcare, that everybody can do it. And so that means, that middle-class families aren't going to be so hamstrung by insurance premiums that they can, no longer afford to live the way that they're living. And you and I have talked about this before too, about how a lot of a lot of tax bracket stuff and whatnot, people just assume that they're going to be taxed. And it's like, well, it probably isn't you unless you have over 12 million in assets or something like that. And then if it's 12 million in assets, you might have a reason to be concerned about higher tax brackets. But it's like, well, but maybe you should be paying tax more. But we can talk about that.
You made the money.
Yeah.
Well, but what I'd love to do, just to submit this to you, and and I understand that dilemma, making money, but it might be only for a certain time in your business because it flows, and then sewing it back into the company and the benefits, and sometimes you get taxed on money you didn't ever take. But at the same time, I think if we don't look at the reality, like a lot of families have less than $1,000 in them, and I think I feel for the family. At the same time, I do get concerned about the savings because I lived in Zimbabwe. They make $2 a day, and they're putting away money. And I think there's a lot more discretionary ways to. I got 8 lights on in here, and I got a computer.
Yeah. Totally. And the Dave Ramsey sort of thing. But I think that there's a balance here and a balance in discussion, because especially I think that when people have lived and just were extreme, especially in urban, like I think being poor in rural communities and being poor in urban communities are not entirely different. I'm not saying one's better than the other or anything like that, but I do think they're different experiences. And I think that recognizing too, if you're poor from a family that has zero money and zero assets, so that because sometimes, you just are like, hey, I'm out of so many times for me, there's been like, well, just having you, or even if it wasn't you or mom or like Amy Ann and it's not like but I could, like, if I was in a situation where I was like, well, everything came crashing down, and it could even be my fault, at least I would have like this sort of safety net. And a lot of people don't have that. But I think what's really important is to, have conversations about managing money. One is like we have so much opportunity to go into debt, and like that can just build so quickly and just keep you, where you make a few bad decisions and then you're ruined for a long time. And so I think there's a lot of discussion about like how to avoid those things and how to be smart with your money and how to build towards assets, not rent, but to buy, and like different conversations about that. But I think what can be really, really dangerous, and I think that a lot of I think I was there, and I think that a lot of people that I grew up with, is that I think it's very easy to villainize people who are poor, and make it seem as if they're poor because they did something wrong. It's like in the puritanical days where like if people were sick, it was because they did something evil or something like that. And it's like, it's just a category error. Like, no, I mean, sometimes some things can be because of mismanagement, and it can be reflection on aspects of character or wrong decisions. But I think we also need to be a lot more empathetic and a lot more cautious about how quickly we view people who are poor.
Totally agree. I mean, I'm referring maybe to, I know couples that each make 100,000, and then they just don't manage it that well. But
you should be able to. But and that's where I'm like, being 2% of our labor force is minimum wage labor. So I mean, that's 2% of the jobs, and I think the hardest working people are often the poorest. Like I think that you look at someone go to Hobby Lobby, go to Home Depot, go to
restaurant,
hotel, or just like anything, and you ask them like how many hours are you working a week, it's going to be a lot. It's going to be, I work 40 here, I work another 20 there, and then on the weekends I nanny or something like that. And it's not, we need to get away from this idea that just because you're poor means that you don't work or don't contribute to society. Because like I said, 2% of the market force.
No, I agree. Well, two things. I think I'm running out of gas, but
yeah.
I would just say I do believe that there's a responsibility. The athletes that I was chaplain to the professional athletes.
Yeah.
And this expectation of wealth and no, there's a privilege with wealth that I just can't imagine somebody making $50 million a year for throwing a football. So,
besides Patrick Mahomes, because
and
he deserves that.
Yeah.
I just like Patrick Mahomes.
I do too, but I think you can share, and you can share a lot, and I do believe this benevolence movement. But here's the last thing I want to say is that the people are making some really good comments and questions. What I'd like to do is talk as soon as we can and address, because I have totally run out of gas. And I can see, Valerie saying, I have a disabled son. There wasn't any help for us unless we made, they had to make money to take care of them. And then another one said, which was interesting, said, okay, now there's this real push for Trump to denounce white supremacy, but Biden didn't denounce Antifa. Our BLM Inc. is not a great group. BLM is different.
Yeah, I think that it's a different, because I think categorically they're different. I just think that I think
BLM Inc. and BML.
BML Inc. I just think that I think it's just categorically different. I think that I think white nationalism is just on a different level of other stuff. But I get people with it and
Antifa, you wouldn't.
Well, I mean, it's hard for me to discern what's real from what's fake with a lot of that.
I'm a Wallace.
You're a Wallace?
The moderator. Sir, Jedediah John, you come on, tell me, you would denounce Antifa, wouldn't you?
Just the fact that I let you get through that question means I already won, right? Because that was okay. I would definitely denounce from it is hard for me to understand what it is because I'm not sure an anti-fascist movement that's not fascism is bad and I think but destruction of property right now is not I did denounce destruction of property. I denounce violence I'm a pacifist with a lot of things I'm not.
But you've seen on the bridges where hundreds of them and they won't let a car get through and then
but the social disruption I'm totally fine with. I think that in particular situations social disruption is totally net the Montgomery bus boycott or a lot of those things. I think that it with particular things, I think that if you're not harming
people, they are. You're having innocent people driving and they're stopping their cars and they're beating on their cars and you got 100 around you.
Out of
the cars. You wouldn't go for that.
No. And I want to be very clear that I obviously don't advocate for violence of any kind on different groups. I think it's more about for me, what are the values and stuff like that. And I think that there can be just some quick ad hominem attacks where I don't think fascism is the same as Marxism. I think that there's questions where people can get really quick where they're well, this and that and this and that. And I think that you have to look and be okay, well, what is this actually about? And so, like, I think that there's, like I said, like I one of the most beautiful, compassionate people I've ever met is a Marxist, Christian, and so I think that a lot of times I don't know, it seems to me to be a little bit of about whataboutism sort of thing when people are talking about the KKK or talking about white nationalism. And it's like, this has roots, and there's like actual organizations, and this is not just like attitudes. These are positions, and there's one, and they're fundamentally and definitionally against equality, where it's like the Aryan race is superior to all else. And that's like, okay, well, that's super dangerous, and that's a level of danger that we like need to address and talk about. And then when we talk about it, and they're like, well, Antifa, and it's like, I don't disagree that like we need to violence of any kind, and especially on an organizational level, yeah, we absolutely have to address it. But it does seem to me like to be a little bit about whataboutism, where it's like, oh, well, what about this group? And it's like, we need to address this is an issue. And it's not like, well, it's bad on both sides. Like, let's address this problem.
Yeah. Well, and that could lead us into a different discussion. So how about stop here? I mean, we got some amazing comments. Tammy Martin talking about the help the poor needs brilliantly. And, I think I'm just really blown away at the wisdom of the comments made. And, about Obamacare, and it's really worth responding to, because I'm in a position where I'm writing a paper and finishing it for the vice president, and that's not saying anything. Just I feel like after I pray and ask good questions, I'll get some pretty it'll feel alive insights for a hopeful way to advance together. And so I think that we got something to offer this group of people that is really, seeking, because it is, as you defined Antifa, I think, like you said, we look for the values, but it's like with the white supremacists. Well, I always look at when somebody's got a really different philosophy. I mean, I have to, because Jesus did. You look at the abused and the abuser, and you just say, you love your enemy. You just say, the guy who was going to slam his kid's fingers.
Right.
He was a white supremacist, and he'd been put down by minorities, and that was his story. And so,
and I'm with you with always having compassion for the person, right, no matter how evil their beliefs are or how far away from compassion they even are oriented. I do think, though, there is a thing where it's like, I think we as a society can be like, hey, these are just standards that we're not gonna cross. Like that, this is totally socially unacceptable. Not just like violence, but just like beliefs. And like I think that, I'm not necessarily, like I just think that even denouncing belief that like an Aryan race is superior or something like that. I think that, that we have to have that. And that's what I was talking about, values, about knowing that you have enough values with the person that you're talking to, that you can be able to have like a sense of like, well, we both want America to be a better place, and to be a place that, whether it's our children or our grandchildren or whatever, that we're making this a better world. And so I think that starts the conversation, but I think it is important too to be like, well, what do we value about the United States? And I think that there is significant overlap. I think that there's some disconnects on particular things, but I think that the key is to emphasize more what we both value and then make that a reality.
Yeah, and I concur, and I just love you immensely, and I love this conversation, and I love Taylor, but that statement doesn't need to be inflammatory.
Well, let's not. Yeah,
we won't go there, but I think that I think we'll just go places like you said that we can solve the world's problems for everybody. And I love their comments. I'd love to have them, give us their understandings, because this is a very, very important time in how we choose. It'll affect more than 4 years. So I got to go the rest of. I love you so much.
Love you too. Wait, hey, I'm gonna end broadcast, but you gotta make sure that last time you left it up too.
Okay. And
wait.
Let's do it pretty soon.
I think I could do it on my end.
Okay, I'll be right back.
All right.
Okay, bye.
All right. Love you. See ya.
Okay, bye-bye.